I was born on 129th Street, right here in Harlem, between Lenox and 5th. I was born in the house. You know why I was born in the house? I was born in the house because in the South, they were holding experiments, you know, Tuskegee, but at the same time, they were holding experiments on little black babies. They were taking melanin from them.
Thank you. Jealous.
You see, racism exists in America. Have absolutely no doubt about it. It is alive. So, I mean, my sisters, my brothers, listen. Let me tell you a little about myself, and then I will go into some other things. And by the way, I worked with the Troy Davis family and on the Troy Davis case for quite some time, and I am a paralegal. You see, I am a paralegal, so I know the law. But I was born in Harlem, and my family eventually moved to Brooklyn. And at the age of 16, 17, I joined the Black Panther Party. And I say this because most people don't even know what the Black Panther, the first thing they gave me when I joined the Black Panther Party was a copy of Brown versus Board of Education, the study that was done by John Henry Clark about black children being unable to learn properly if they don't eat, if they went to school with hungry stomachs. So we started breakfast programs, you see, about their clothing, about seeing other African Americans in the books and literature that they read or was to learn from, so they can make some positive identification. So we set up basic African American classes, African American history classes. You see, that's what the Black Panther Party started out about. But then we noticed that we were having police officers were running in our communities and kicking down our doors and beating up our men and slapping our women and calling us all kind of disrespectful names. So yes, we rose up against that. You see, and we did what we had to do. And then when drugs entered our community, we don't own no planes, we don't own no trains, we don't own no buses, and none of that grow in our community. So how did it get here?
That's right. Say that again.
How did it get here?
That's right. Come on.
Is racism alive?
Yes, it is.
So we fought against it. And I was involved in one of those units. Now let me explain something to you. I was involved in a historical circumstance that cost 2 human lives. And for that, I'm very regretful. I am very, that's one reason I'm involved in what I'm involved in, because I support life over death. You see? And I'm ashamed that I was involved in a historical circumstance that took the lives of 2 human beings. One was a New York City police officer, and one was my comrade and my friend. Somebody I grew up with. I don't distinguish between the two. And I can tell you that Dick Gregory was in Texas. Dick Gregory was in Texas when Lawrence was executed, protesting against his execution. It just so happened that the 2 things were happening simultaneously. And Troy Davis was a priority at that time. So most of us was dead. But no, I don't personally, I don't believe in the death penalty. I don't believe anybody got any right to kill anybody anywhere for any reason. If you can find a reason to kill, then you have only justified the reason that another man killed the man, so let him go.
Right.
You see? But that's that Wild West mentality. You know? But anyway, I was involved in that incident. One night, August 21st, we were involved in doing basically surveillance at the time. We went in and all hell broke loose. Shots was fired. All I knew is my comrade ran out. He had a gunshot in his arm. I tried to go to his aid. All hell broke loose. Several officers came to testify at the trial that they just happened to be in the same area. you know, and so they responded to it. So anyway, I got away because of my training, and I was arrested at the Canadian border 2 weeks later. I was taken to a state trooper barracks and I was beaten. Out of that, they say, I made a confession. I don't know what happened. I don't know whether I did or not. I know the facts of it. The facts as laid down in the confession wasn't my story. But anyway, I went to trial. I had all white jury, all male, average age 55 out of Queens County. No history. No history. When African Americans started to move into Harlem, you see, where did whites go? Queens, Staten Island, Long Island. So those are really the European Americans who did not want to have association with me. And they sat in my trial. I was found guilty. I was found guilty and I was sentenced to death. And I was 20 years old at the time. And lo and behold, I'm sitting in the death house a year, and the district attorney in my case is disbarred for taking bribes from organized criminals. I'm sitting in the death house a year and a half, and the judge in my case is cited in the New Yorker Magazine article by Jack Newman as being one of the 10 worst judges in New York State because of his favoritism to organized crime. And the lawyer who represented me, who was assigned to represent me, later on turned out to be a lawyer who frequented representing organized criminals. But that didn't get me out. That didn't get me out. Space and time, circumstance, God's hand. Made Thurgood Marshall in the United States Supreme Court. And one of the first civilized decisions with respect to the death penalty was made. Because I'm sure that Billie Holiday didn't have too much of an impact except to inform us that there was some strange fruits going on in the South. Very strange fruits. You see? Very strange fruits. And I look at a picture of them. I had nowhere in the world I could support the death penalty. I just looked at the picture. She had the experience watching them African American people hanging. Men, women, and children hanging from trees. All right, so Furman versus Georgia occurs. I get out the death house. I go into prison. I spent 20 years in prison. In that time, I learned and taught African American history. I started out as the office clerk in the NAACP and worked my way to first vice president. I studied law. I work on other people's cases. I get myself a time cut. I mean, you know, I'm working. Then I go to New York Theological Seminary and earn a master's degree. And I'm with you now. I'm with you. I'm with you. And I can tell you, after working with the Troy Davis family and through the campaign to end the death penalty to help Troy Davis, I will say to you that Troy Davis was an innocent man. And let me tell you now, see, one of the problems with our legal system is that I remember I was sitting in the yard. In fact, there was a debate going on. I think it was Ted Koppel. Ted Koppel. And it was between David Dukes, and I believe Brother Al Sharpton was there that day. The day he went off, he went stupid. Got really stupid. But as he was getting stupid, he was getting stupid. I sat there, and when he finished, my mouth was wide open. Because he said, "You can't stop us. We're everywhere." And the first place he named is, "We're in your police forces." We're in your military. We're your doctors. We're your lawyers.
Right.
And since then, the prison system, especially in New York State, went from 12,000 prisons to over 40-something thousand now. Or is it 70-something thousand?
66.
66,000. You see? I mean, think about it. Think about what Freddie said. Brother Fred Douglass. That's who said slavery is fruitful in giving itself names. But pay attention. Understand that our legal system is smoke and mirrors.
Right.
Come on, that's right.
The United States Supreme Court reversed Troy Davis' case, citing Herrera versus Collins. Collins didn't get it. Collins didn't get it. He was finally executed. He went to his execution day, saying, "You're killing an innocent man." But what standard was used in Collins' case? Was it this tremendous standard of prove yourself innocent? No, it wasn't. It was not. What was the mandate of the court to Judge William Moore in Troy Davis' case? It was to receive testimony and make findings of fact as to whether evidence that could have been obtained at the time of trial clearly establishes Davis's innocence. That's all the court said. It didn't say, make sure he proved. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. I was there in the courtroom. I was there in the courtroom. And when Justice Moore came out, one of the first things he said, there was an argument going on between the prosecutor and the defense attorneys, and Judge Moore said, just sit down. He's talking to the prosecutor. He said, I don't know if I'm going to accept any of this hearsay testimony. Not one witness has testified. Judge Moore was he was a chief judge of the federal district through which Troy's case worked itself through. What does that man hold in making a decision about Troy Davis' case? The integrity of that court. He was the chief judge. And when he came out with the standard, understand some smoke and mirrors, procedures, due process. This court didn't lay down a standard through which he used a evidentiary hearing type process that I don't think should have been used in this particular case. And I read the decision, smoke and mirrors, very little long. It was all Judge Moore's opinion, and he ruled his opinion against. He measured the opinion of the witnesses against the opinion of the police officers that came to testify. I'm telling you, I was there, and I have a legal background. And I'm going to tell you something else about the Troy Davis case. Troy Davis, sisters and brothers, listen to this and hear me out. Troy Davis, understand what happened here. The reason why the case was accepted by the United States Supreme Court after having been denied was that the Board of Pardon and Parole refused to issue a warrant of execution because they said there's too much doubt in this case. Too much doubt. So now we have a defendant sitting in a death house cell and can't nothing be done to him. Suddenly we hear that the United States Supreme Court accepts his case. Oh, we jumped. Oh my God. Hey, glad they will let the brother go. But that was just really to wipe away the doubt through some smoke and mirrors procedures. That's all that was. You know why? Because they would have had to grant him some form of clemency. And life without parole didn't exist. when Troy was originally sentenced. So what would they have to do? Sentence him to what, 20, 25 life? Troy would have been out within 2 or 3 years if they did 25. He would have went before a parole board, and he had so much support in the community, and it seemed like all his jailers liked him. He was a good, I mean, he was know who he was, they respected him, you know? So, what happened then?
Smoking mirrors.
Smoking mirrors. Smoking mirrors. Have no doubt about it. That was all smoke and mirrors. There was a lynching in Georgia the day that Troy Davis was executed. And you need to see it in no other light. And you need to be concerned.
Right.
Those little babies that's running around you are worth $60,000. $60,000 to the criminal justice system. Or more. Let's look at it. Let's look at this practically. Let's look at this responsibly. Your children, your young children running up and down these streets right now are worth $60,000 at least.
Yeah, that's right.
There's an item number that they're ready to attach to them that will pay the salaries of police officers, judges, juries. It will pay the correctional officers. Understand where you are at and understand the reality of it. Sisters and brothers, I learned a phrase when I was in prison, you know, and that phrase was, people who participate in conspiracies against themselves. People who participate in conspiracies against themselves. If you support the death penalty, believe me, you are just participating in a conspiracy against yourself. Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence, thank you. From the Republic of Brooklyn, Senator Eric Adams.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother, for the presentation. I just want to shift us back to you know, the topic at hand, so folks can ask questions. I'm going to be very brief. Just one footnote before I start. You know, the case of Sean Bell shooting where the officer is being put up for termination. I want you to go back in your mind and tell me when was the last time an officer who was found not guilty in criminal court was, number one, found guilty in a departmental trial, and number two, fired without intervention. No, the Zongo, the shooting of Zongo, he was found guilty in criminal court. He was found guilty in criminal court. So when we're all with this choir saying fire him, fire him, fire him, no Diallo cop was fired. No cop was fired in the Brooklyn shooting out in Canarsie. So right. So I just want you to think about that. Okay, let me switch to the death penalty piece. In a very real way, I'm part of the 40%ers. Hear me. If someone killed my mother, my sister, or my no, feel me? Let me go before y'all start clapping, so you may be booing in a minute, so let me finish. If someone kills my family member, I would want them to die for that. If someone raped my daughter or my son with pedophilia behavior, I would want them to be castrated for that. If someone does something to my family member, I would want them to feel the full wrath. In fact, I would want to be the person that actually carry out the execution. But the reality is, the criminal justice system cannot be based on the emotion of the victim solely. That's not what the system is about. We should allow victims to have victim impact statements to share with you how they feel about the crime, but we cannot have a criminal justice system that's solely based on the pain of the individual victim, because the pain of the victim is not often looking at the facts, they're looking at their emotions. The components that go into the criminal justice systems are many. They're not one. And when you look at the components, so my desire to see someone killed for killing is based on a perfect system. However, we're not in a perfect system. We're in a system where we have prosecutorial misconduct, where prosecutors are allowed to do whatever they want in many cases and free from any real oversight. And a footnote to this is not about one case. And this is not about one example. So we can't use the exceptions to base it as the rule. We're not talking about what happened to only Troy. We're not talking about what happened to one individual who was drugged behind a car. We're not talking about one individual who may have been mass murderers. We're talking about the entire system. So it's not one individual case you can look at. So when you examine the components of the criminal justice system that the death penalty and penalty is born out of, you see it is full with flaws. Why 40% of people saying, let's kill everybody in the community of color? Because they're reading stories every day that give them the perception that everyone who's arrested is automatically guilty of a crime. The police department enforced confessions, the failure for video confessions, the failure to actually produce evidence and to make sure that evidence is handled properly, to hide evidence, to make sure that evidence doesn't come in full disclosure. That's another component that's wrong. So when you start adding up all the components that go into, number one, to shape public opinion, number two, to shape the opinions of juries. Don't let anyone fool you that the jurors don't read newspapers, that the jury doesn't have public opinion, and then the psyche of people. Not only white folks believe that a person of color should be prosecuted for killing a white folk, black folks feel that way. Far too many black folks believe that the penalty should be severe for those who are victims outside their race because we have become attuned to victimization within our race. And many of us applaud when someone outside our race is a victim and the person who committed that act should be brought up on the death penalty. So there's many components. The reason I am opposed to the death penalty in its existing state is because we don't have a fair system. I should not just decide what is a capital a crime based on my opinion. If there was a standardization, that's one thing. Because you can't tell a parent who lost their child to some form of violence that his killer should not get the death penalty when another parent should based on those other standards that are listed. I don't believe that. And since we can't standardize the death penalty, since we can't ensure that we don't have corruption in the prosecutor's office or the police department, since we cannot ensure that we don't have judicial biases behind the justice system, because justice is not blind, and if it is blind, there's surely a blindfold, a hole in it, because there's some different justices that are administered in our courtroom. Since we cannot ensure that police officers are going to process evidence correctly, since we cannot assure that everyone who's brought up on charges is going to receive a meaningful criminal defense, since we can't assure all of that stuff, then we cannot have a death penalty in the current state.
Thank you, Senator. Before we go to the questions, Professor Blecker, any?
Oh, yes. So we just heard from someone who's in the Troy Davis hearings from the judge that he had, quote, so much support in the community. We also heard that we had a board of pardon and parole who was unwilling to issue the warrant. Now, there are a couple of things you didn't hear, which is that ultimately the Board of Pardon and Parole did issue the warrant. You also didn't hear about the role of the present district attorney in Savannah, who did not oppose Troy Davis's execution, who is African American.
We know that.
You also didn't hear, with all this community support, about the editorials from the Savannah Herald and the Savannah Tribune. Those are the two local African-American newspapers. Do you know how many editorials they ran against the execution of Troy Davis? No. None. I called to make sure that was true because I was told in my researches that there was very little community support for the stay of the execution. The support came nationally, the support came from other organizations like this one, the support came from elsewhere. The people in the community knew that he had earned his nickname, R-A-H, rough as hell. The people in the community knew that those police officers did not coerce that testimony and have had aspersion cast on them as being dishonest when they were not dishonest. The state, local legislators did not oppose his execution. The 2 African-American newspapers did not oppose his execution. The Mixed Race Board of Pardon and Parole did not oppose his execution. The African-American District Attorney did not oppose his execution. Look, you can feel however you feel about race and the death penalty, and there are problems, which I'll mention in just a minute. But do not buy as fact that this was a white, railroaded, racist execution. It was no such thing. Now, let's talk more generally about race.
Mike, wait a second. Wait, hold on a second, Professor. Wait. I was asked to come here to participate in a panel of discussion about the death penalty. Now,
I was asked to come to a panel about discussion of the death penalty, especially the Troy Davis case, for which I prepared for tens of hours.
I am not here to engage in a monologue about a person's perspective of any particular case. You know, Nelson Mandela pointed out a long time that everybody's entitled to their opinion. And so I think that what I have to share on the issue of the death penalty is that it's always an opportunity to educate. And the education of the issue of the death penalty, from my perspective, and I've dedicated more than many hours, I've dedicated my entire professional career to this, is that this issue is too important. This issue is too pervasive to get caught up in the minutia of any particular case. Because I've represented men who've been guilty as hell. And so, but the conversation about the death penalty is not about the individual circumstances of the Jarvis Brown brutal murder of an innocent woman. It's just not. And it does a disservice to people to focus in on the minutia of any particular case. I could sit here and make the case of many innocent people that I thought was innocent, whatever that's worth, who were saved from the death penalty. I've been involved with cases where, fortunately, nobody's gotten the death penalty, but that doesn't really add any information.
That's fine, but with all due respect, it is you who are now engaging in a monologue, and I'm outnumbered 5 to 1 on this panel, and was assured that I would have a chance, which I'm now trying to exercise.
Say whatever you want to say.
Thank you.
It doesn't matter.
Oh, that's very polite.
Let me jump in. Again, I think, as Attorney Ricco said, everybody obviously has their position. I think what we should do, and we'll have plenty of time, that's what dialogue is for, and we do want to bring the audience into it. I think we allow Professor Blecker to finish his statement, and I think in the process of the question, the answering, and additional comments, hopefully we can deal with all of that.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'll move away from Troy Davis and honor your request and make no more references to that case, and talk about race and the death penalty, and respond to some of the comments that have been made. It is true. First of all, it's true that we have a stained historical legacy of whites using the death penalty to suppress black males, especially in the context of rape and having consensual sex with white females. It is true that this, and undeniable, and should never be forgotten, that the state of Georgia for many years had 2 separate sets of laws, one for whites and one for blacks, where blacks would be eligible for the death penalty and whites would not be eligible for the death penalty for the same set of crimes. I don't forget that. I don't forgive that. I'm not ignorant of it. It is also true that the United States Supreme Court decided McCleskey, in which they would not allow the ball to study